So today, I want to show you how to lead through team mistakes without collapsing back into being the bottleneck. I'm going to walk you through what I call the calm escalation framework, okay? This is how you protect standards, ownership, and this is how you protect trust all at the same time. When team mistakes happen, us as chiropractors tend to default to one of three patterns, okay? The first is immediate takeover. We try to solve the problem ourselves, and this recreates dependency, and we make it personal, okay? And this creates fear. And the third one is all about avoidance. And this creates drift and then eventually resentment. This is not just a moment, but it's a pattern through your practice. Then you can start to escalate progressively. And that's how standards rise without you becoming the center of everything again, okay? And that's how leadership protects your freedom instead of quietly eroding it. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Marketing Your Practice podcast, the podcast where I have the pleasure of simplifying the marketing and the mindset so you, the chiropractor, can increase your impact, your income, and your enjoyment in practice too. Now, over the last few episodes, we've been working through one very specific problem, the problem of no time or no freedom in practice. And I've said this before, but it's worth me repeating, okay? In practice, there really are only three problems that any chiropractor or chiropractors ever face. The first is nobody knows us, okay? The second is no one stays. And the third one is no time or freedom, okay? This leadership series has been focused on that third problem because the truth is most chiropractors don't lack skill, okay? They don't lack care and they don't lack work ethic. What they lack is leadership structure that allows the practice to function without them being the center of everything. Now, right back in episode 446, we talked about the CEO check-in. We talked about creating space to think instead of constantly reacting to what's going on in your practice. In episode 447, we unpacked how many chiropractors unintentionally become the bottleneck in their own practice. We do this without even realizing. In episode 448, we explored decision fatigue, okay, and how it's very often the decisions that you're carrying, not the volume of patients, that exhaust you. We often think that I'm tired because of all the work that I'm doing, but it's actually the decisions that are going on in the background that are exhausting as well. In episode 449, we moved from decisions into ownership, okay? In episode 450, we built the quiet architecture of standards, triggers and feedback loops and a review cadence, okay? Then last week in episode 451, we introduced the 3-question filter that protects your freedom before you need to step back in, okay? Now that was, is this dangerous or is it just uncomfortable? Has the structure had enough time to actually work? And if I step back in right now, what am I teaching the system, okay? Now, in essence, that episode there was all about restraint. But today, we want to move into something equally important here as well. What happens when it's not just uncomfortable? What happens when a team member genuinely drops the ball, okay? When a standard isn't met, when a patient experience suffers, when there are real consequences. Because this is the moment that tests everything, okay? This is where many of us as chiropractors, even the really good, competent ones, regress. We tighten up, we override ownership, and we step back into control. Not because we're controlling, but because we care. So today, I want to show you how to lead through team mistakes without collapsing back into being the bottleneck, okay? I'm going to walk you through what I call the calm escalation framework, okay? This is how you protect standards, this is how you protect ownership, and this is how you protect trust all at the same time, all right? So let's get into it. Now, I want to start by acknowledging this, okay, something honestly, and that is it's really difficult when you see mistakes in your practice, especially when there's repeated mistakes. Not small stylistic differences, not personality quirks, but standards not being met, patients leaving confused, money being left on the table, follow-ups not happening, okay? Because when this happens, it doesn't just feel operational. For many of us, it feels deeply personal. You built this practice, you care deeply about it, your name is often on the door, And when standards slip, it can feel like your reputation is on the line, okay? And this is where leadership gets tested right here in these moments, okay? This is when the pressure rises and chiropractors typically at this stage fall into one of three mistakes, and sometimes we end up doing all of them, okay? So when the pressure rises, okay, these three mistakes or these three patterns, they look like this. And the reason I want to name them, okay, because if you can spot them here, then there's a chance that you'll be able to interrupt them and prevent them from happening. Now, mistake number one is really the immediate takeover. So something goes wrong and you jump right in. Now, you handle the patient, you redo the checkout, you make the phone call, you clean up the mess yourself. Now, this often feels efficient, it feels responsible, it feels important, okay? But underneath this reaction is usually an assumption, and it's important that we kind of investigate this assumption. And the assumption is this: the system can't handle this, okay? The staff person isn't ready. It's quicker for me to just do it. I'm the only one that can get this right. And sometimes while this assumption might be quiet, we don't often say it out loud, but we're acting on it, okay? Now, there's a hidden cost to these assumptions. You don't just solve the problem, but you're teaching the system. And you're teaching the system that when things matter, it always needs to come back to you, okay? And you teach the individual you can't be trusted in high stakes moments, okay? And you teach yourself, I can't truly step away. And over time, the system never gets a chance to strengthen, okay? The staff person never gets a chance to grow. And the result is dependency. And dependency always recreates the bottleneck, okay? Let me say that again. Dependency always recreates the bottleneck. Now, mistake number two, when we see this happening in our practice, when we see balls being dropped, systems not being followed, is we make it all about the person. Now, again, this is another one that's often subtle. You don't necessarily take over in this moment. You confront it, okay? But instead of correcting the problem, you start judging the person. The internal language becomes something like this: they don't get it, they're careless, I can't trust them, they're not cut out for this. And even if you're not saying those words out loud, it leaks through, okay? Your tone tightens, your patience shortens, your questions end up sounding like a cross-examination, and your feedback feels like criticism. Now, the team member isn't thinking about the process. They end up thinking about self-protection, okay? But here's what most chiropractors miss. Your entire team is watching how you do this. They're watching how you respond to mistakes. They're watching how safe it is to get something wrong. They're watching whether growth is encouraged or whether it's punished, and they draw conclusions really quickly. If mistakes in your practice feel personal, they're going to stop taking initiative. All right. And initiative is one of those things as chiropractors that we all want to see our staff taking. They're going to stop trying new language. They'll stop stretching into growth, and they'll default to caution instead of ownership. Okay. Now, you don't just train the individual in that moment. You're training the entire culture of the team, a culture where people get nervous. Okay. And when they're nervous, they're not going to innovate. Now, this doesn't improve, and again, they end up not taking responsibility, okay? The system waits, it checks, and it protects itself. When feedback is personal, standards will never rise, okay? Safety drops, initiative drops, and ownership collapses, okay? Now, we don't want to get this. Okay, let's move into mistake number 3, and this is avoidance and learned helplessness, okay? Now, this one doesn't look reactive, it looks defeated. Now, you see the issue, you feel the frustration, but instead of stepping in, you slowly stop believing that it can change, okay? The internal story in your mind becomes, this is just how it is. Good staff are hard to find. It's easy if I just accept it. This probably isn't fixable, okay? This, as I mentioned beforehand, is learned helplessness, and it's incredibly dangerous because instead of correcting the issue, what you end up doing is you lower your expectations. You tolerate missed standards, you stop having the harder or difficult conversations, and you quietly end up carrying the emotional weight of the practice. And again, the team is watching, okay? When standards drift and nothing happens, they learn something too, okay? And that is that this mustn't really matter. This is acceptable here. And the culture doesn't rise to what you hope, okay? It stabilizes to what you tolerate. So over time, avoidance ends up turning into resentment. You're going to end up feeling alone. You'll feel fatigued, and you'll feel like leadership is really, really heavy. You'll say that this is just not for you. And eventually what ends up happening is burnout creeps in, not because of patient volume, but because of unresolved tension that exists in your practice. Now, takeover recreates dependency, personal correction recreates fear, but avoidance recreates drift, okay? And none of these, okay, give us the end result that we want, which is freedom and more time back, okay? So remember, takeover erodes freedom, the personal correction erodes trust, and avoidance erodes standards, all right? None of these build sustainable leadership. So what's the alternative, okay? That's where the calm escalation framework actually comes in, all right? And just to place it properly in this series, what I want to do is I want to take you back to those questions that we asked in episode 451, okay? There were 3 questions that we asked. It is it dangerous or just uncomfortable? Has the structure had a fair chance to actually work, okay? And if I step in right now, what am I teaching the system? Now, what you've determined in this situation because of the mistake is that this really matters. Yes, the structure has had a fair chance to work and stepping in is necessary. So now the question becomes this: how do I actually step in without needing to reclaim control? Yes, you can do that. I'll show you in this episode. How do I correct without crushing confidence? And how do I protect standards, okay, and protect trust? Now, the calm escalation framework has 5 steps. Let's go through these. The first step, the most important of all of these really, is that we need to stabilize ourselves first. So what is this, okay? You regulate before you engage. Now, why does it matter? Whatever you bring into the conversation becomes the emotional tone for the practice, or certainly for that conversation. If you walk in tight, frustrated, or embarrassed, okay, it doesn't matter how good your words are, your nervous system will lead the room. So what do we end up doing, okay? It just means sometimes it's as simple as just taking 30 seconds, maybe even 24 hours. Breathe, name what you're feeling, then remind yourself, this is solvable. This is leadership. It's not an emergency. Calm first and then correction, okay? Now, once we've been through that first phase, we move into phase number 2. And this is where we're separating outcome from identity. This is really important, folks, okay? What I mean by this is you treat the miss as an outcome problem, not a character problem. I'll say that again. You treat the problem, whatever problem happened, as an outcome problem, not a character problem. Now, this matters because the moment it becomes personal, people, your staff members, are going to move into defense. And we can't be in growth and defense at the same time, okay? A defensive person, is very difficult for them to actually learn. So what do? In your mind, you replace "they're careless" with "the outcome didn't meet the standard," okay? You're not attacking the person. What we're doing is we're correcting the result. Now, step 3 in this calm escalation, what we do is we investigate the structure again before correcting the person, all right? We diagnose the system before we judge behavior. Now, this matters because most repeated mistakes are structural. Remember, they're unclear standards, they're missed triggers, they're unclear ownership, or they're just capacity constraints, all right? Remember that. We've talked about that in previous episodes. So how do you go about doing this? You ask process-based questions. Walk me through what happened here. What's the standard? What's the trigger? Who is it that owns this way? What got in the way of this actually happening, okay? What you're doing here is you're mapping out the system. You're not hunting for fault in the individual. Now, step number 4, what we do is we correct clearly without reclaiming ownership. Now, what do I mean by this? You set the standard firmly and you help them meet it without taking the task back, okay? Now, at this stage, if you rescue, then what you do is that you recreate dependency, all right? If you soften the standard, what you end up doing is you recreate drift, all right? So again, state the standard. Simply make it non-negotiable, okay? And then offer support. You might say something like, here's the standard. Here's what good looks like. Let's practice how we'll do it next time. And if needed, you observe, or you get one of the other staff members to observe as well, okay? But what you don't do is absorb all of this, okay? Now, the 5th and final stage of this calm escalation. It's all about reinforcing confidence and forward motion, okay? So you finish with capacity, not shame. Shame is never going to get you to where you want, okay? This matters because teams grow when mistakes become development, when you have a growth mindset as well, okay? Not about punishment. When a mistake becomes about fear, then people stop taking ownership again, and you will never have the freedom that you want in practice. So what we're doing here is we're anchoring a belief, saying things like this: I know you can do this. This is part of your role, and I'm backing you to grow into it. Let's tighten the process and let's move forwards together. This is how standards rise and how confidence rises too, okay? Now, let me show you what this might look like with a real-world example in practice. Okay, let's imagine this. A patient completes their report of findings. They've heard their care plan. They seemed really receptive with you in the report room. But when they reach the checkout, they leave without booking their next visits. They haven't committed to their care. They haven't prepaid. And a few days later, they end up calling back and they're incredibly uncertain, okay? You end up seeing this in your numbers or you feel it in the wobble, okay? Now, this matters, okay? So how is it that you apply the calm escalation framework to situations just like this? Let's walk through it, okay? Step number 1, remember, stabilize yourself first. Your first reaction might be frustration. It's often going to be. You might be tempted to say things like, we can't afford this, we've worked hard on the report of findings conversions, and this keeps on happening. But before you speak, what you want to do is you want to regulate. You want to remind yourself this is a leadership moment, okay? It's not an emotional reaction moment, and you want to walk into the conversation calm. Now, if you start with here, it's really hard to go wrong. They're looking at your nervous system there for coherence, all right? So step number 2, now we separate the outcome from identity. We don't want to play the blame game. So instead of thinking they can't handle the report of findings checkout, you start to think the outcome didn't meet the standard. This subtle shift is going to protect the relationship. You're correcting a result. You're not labeling the person. Now, this is not me getting all woke and saying we don't have standards in the practice here. This is all about leadership, okay? This is about creating a safe environment for people to be able to grow and learn. And you being the dictator in your practice is not what is going to work. Now, step number 3 is this. We want to investigate the structure before correcting the problem. Again, you sit down with your CA and you say, I noticed that the patient left the report of findings without booking their next visit. Can you walk me through how that checkout went? Then you're going to listen. Maybe they're going to say something like this. They seemed hesitant, so I didn't want to push, or I wasn't sure how firm to be. Now what you've done is you've identified something, okay? This isn't carelessness. It's uncertainty in around authority, okay? Or a lack of clarity in around what the standard is. Then what you can do is you can clarify. You can remind them, look, at the report of findings, the standard is every patient leaves booked in for their next visits. Clear on their financial commitment, okay? That's not about pressure. It's just about clarity. You might choose to role play, refine your language to strengthen their confidence, okay? But you don't say, I'll handle the report of finding checkout, or you give it to another CA, because that would undo everything, all right? Step number 4, remember this. Correct clearly without reclaiming ownership, okay? Again, we're going to reinforce the standard. We're going to let them know this is part of the patient, or this part of the patient journey is critical, and it's part of your role, and I need you to be firm and clear here. Then you support, okay? I'm going to observe the next one, or I'm going to have another staff person observe the next one, or we'll role play it now, or I'll record you, whatever it is that works there. But you want to give them an opportunity to learn and implement, okay? And then you can give feedback if needed. But important is that ownership stays with them, and therefore standards are going to stay high. Now, the 5th and final step is to reinforce confidence and forward motion, okay? You want to finish with the belief of something like this. Hey, you're capable of this. This is why you're in the role. Let's tighten it up. Let's move forwards. Now, here's what just happened when we walked through those 5 steps. You protected the standard, you strengthened the system, you increased clarity, and you reinforced ownership. And you did it without recentering the practice right back on you, okay? This is calm leadership under pressure. Now, okay, let's talk about what happens when the same issue repeats over and over again. I'm sure many of you have experienced this. We certainly have and do in our practice. Now, one mistake is developmental, but repeated mistakes, okay, this starts to become data, okay? And this is where many of us as chiropractors start to wobble, okay? Because the first time you coach, the second time you hope, and the third time you feel incredibly frustrated, okay? And somewhere in there, you're tempted to either take it back or emotionally shut down. Now, this is where the calm escalation framework becomes progressive, okay? It's not reactive, it's not dramatic, but it's progressive. So, if the same issue shows up again, in this case, the report of finding checkout not meeting the standard, then you move up the ladder deliberately, all right? Let me take you slowly, step by step through this. So level 1 is about coaching and clarifying, okay? This is after the first repeat. We just did our first walkthrough beforehand. Problems popped up again. We're going to clarify and coach. Now, it's important here that you assume positive intent. Now, saying something like this, hey, we've talked about this once beforehand. I want to make sure that the standard is crystal clear and that you feel confident delivering it, okay? You revisit the exact expectation, the language to use, the tone required, and the outcome of that defines success. Again, you might choose to role play. You might want to observe and then debrief. At this level, what you're doing is you're strengthening skill and clarity. And yes, it's okay for people to have to be told multiple times, all right? Some of the things that we're doing are complicated and they're living and communicating in a way that many of our staff members have never done before, okay? Let's talk about level 2. This is all about confirming ownership and expectations. So if the problem happens again, so now we're on problem number 3, okay? Now the tone needs to shift slightly, okay? We're still calm, but we need to be more direct now. We've clarified this twice now, and the standard isn't optional. It's part of your role, okay? This is sort of language that we want to say. Now we're going to be assessing something different. This is important. We need to ask ourselves, is this a skill gap? Is this a clarity gap? Or is this a willingness gap? Now you might ask, is there something stopping you from executing this the way that we've outlined? What this question does is it invites honesty, because sometimes the issue isn't competence, it's discomfort, or it's confidence, okay? But now the standard is explicit, all right? Let's move to level number 3, because this now gets into formal accountability. So if the pattern continues, the conversation at this stage now needs to become more serious. We've coached this, we've clarified this, we've supported this. The role requires this standard to be met. This is no longer about development alone, okay? This is performance alignment. So you've defined clearly what must change, by when, and what happens if it doesn't, okay? Let me say this again, because this is pivotal, folks, and this will save you a lot of HR problems down the road there too. You want to define really clearly what must change, by when, and what happens if it doesn't, okay? Now, it might sound something like this, okay? Going forwards, every patient finishing a report of findings must leave with their next visits booked and their financial commitment clearly confirmed, okay? That's the standard. I'm going to have somebody observe the next 3 report of finding checkouts over the next 2 weeks so we can make sure that this is consistent. Now, if after that we're still not seeing this standard met, then we're going to need to reassess whether this part of the role or this job is the right fit for you, because it's not optional. Now, notice the tone. It's not aggressive, it's not emotional, but it is very specific. It's time-bound, okay? And it makes the consequence not about role alignment, not about personal worth as well, okay? It's not a threat, it's clarity, because unclear expectations create anxiety, but clear expectations, what they do is they create a sense of maturity. Now, the 4th and final level that happens if, again, we continue to see the problems is all about decision-making. Now, in my experience, if we do everything that I've gone through beforehand, this is incredibly rare. Now, this is assuming that you've hired the right person there too. It's rare, but it is necessary sometimes. If someone cannot or will not meet a clearly defined standard after coaching, support, clarity, and time, then you're not dealing with a mistake, you're dealing with misalignment, okay? And keeping someone in that role that they cannot fulfill does not protect culture, okay? It erodes it. High performers notice, standards drift, and you end up stepping back in to compensate, okay? Now, notice where this ladder goes, okay? It prevents emotional spikes. It prevents avoidance. It prevents premature takeover and it allows you to escalate calmly instead of reactively, okay? And this is the difference, folks, between leadership and frustration. Calm leadership does not mean avoiding hard conversations, okay? I'm going to say that again. Calm leadership does not mean avoiding hard conversations. Sometimes we need to do this. Sometimes we need to move staff members on, okay? It just means having conversations early, clearly, and without losing yourself. Now, when you lead this way, standards stay high, trust stays intact, and ownership remains real, and your freedom remains protected as well, okay? All right, so let's zoom out for a moment and summarize what we've covered in this episode because we've been through a lot, okay? When team mistakes happen, us as chiropractors tend to default to one of three patterns, okay? The first is immediate takeover. We try to solve the problem ourselves, and this recreates dependency. All right, the second one that we tend to do is that we jump into the blame game. We make it personal, okay? And this creates fear, okay? And the third one is all about avoidance, all right? So we avoid the problem. We say there's no use, there's no staff that's good enough. I'm just going to have to deal with this the way it is. And this creates drift and then eventually resentment as well. And none of these protect your freedom. I then introduce you to the calm escalation framework. Okay, this gives us another way to approach mistakes that happen in our practice. The first was all about stabilizing yourself. It was to take 30 seconds or maybe 24 hours to calm yourself and regulate your nervous system. The second was to separate outcome from identity. Remember, this was about not playing the blame game. The third is to investigate the structure. Is it a structural problem? Often it's more about the structure and the triggers and the standards than it is about the person. And the fourth is then to correct clearly without you having, again, to reclaim ownership. Now, the fifth and final part of this system here was to reinforce confidence and forward motion. Okay. Now, when this is not just a moment, but it's a pattern through your practice, then you can start to escalate progressively, okay? Remember, when we see it happening again and again, we clarify and coach, we confirm ownership and expectations, we formalize accountability, and if necessary, what we need to do is we decide, is this the right role for them? We're calm, we're clear, and we're progressive, and that's how standards rise without you becoming the center of everything again, okay? And that's how leadership protects your freedom instead of quietly eroding it. Now, in the next episode, the final episode of this leadership series, we're going to zoom out one last time because structure, ownership, escalation, none of it works long-term if your identity is still tied to being the fixer, okay? We're going to talk about the final shift. This is not operational. This is not structural. Again, this is identity. And it is, how do you lead when you're no longer needed for every decision, okay? How is it that you stay relevant without staying central? It is, how do you build a practice that doesn't just function without you, but grows beyond you, all right? That's where we're heading in our next episode. All right, folks, thanks for all that you do. Keep saving lives, and I'll see you back here next week. Bye. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer Program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.